The death of Steve Jobs. We'll move on to other topics tonight with the media panel, but we've got to start there first. Here's the guest lineup. John Rash is the author of the Rash Report. He teaches at the U of M and is an editorial writer at the Star Tribune. Shayla Teal-Stern is a journalism prof at the U of M. David Brower's back, media reporter for MinPost.com. And rounding out the group is Julio Ojeda-Zapata, consumer tech reporter for the Pioneer Press. Well, Professor, you don't see often that titans of industry get flower bouquets and candles in the wind and all that. What is it about this guy?
I think that I've been thinking about this a lot because I was really surprised at kind of that outpouring. And I think it's the fact that he created these genius products that people attribute a lot of love to, right? People really feel for their iPhones and their iPods in a way that I think they don't with other sort of consumer communication appliances and technologies. And I think that we sort of attribute, that love for those appliances for him.
Julio, as a tech writer, I mean, you could put Steve up there with Edison, Bell, and Ford when it comes to being an innovator.
Yeah, you could say that, although Steve was a unique guy. He was not a technical genius, but he wasn't a smoke and mirrors showman either. He was unique. And these comparisons with Edison are a little forced because, there has never been anybody like this guy, and there never will be.
What's the percentage of design, marketing, innovation? Where does all of that come with him? How do you add that all up?
Well, I was trying to think about sort of how he's affected the newspaper industry and the magazine industry that I've been involved in, and I know that there have been years, multiple years, where the writer side, the reporter side of the operation has been jealous of the design side of the operation for getting to design things on Macs, while a lot of times the bosses made us work on PCs, and so it took, as a Word guy, it took me actually a while to migrate myself from PCs to Macs, and when I did, it was a pleasure, and it was great to discover that there was certainly no sacrifice. Originally, it was Office, was kind of a PC thing, and then suddenly that was a low barrier to entry. So I think I appreciate him as an industrial artist. A lot of us took industrial arts when we were in high school, those of us of a certain age, and he is an industrial artist. He is a toy maker. I can say that's how I use these devices sometimes. They're just beautiful toys. And I think people put a lot of emotion into that.
Marketing is interesting with Apple.
Indeed, he's
and
a master marketer.
And that 1984 ad.
We forget that
Wow.
Before that ad ran, the Super Bowl certainly had Budweiser, Clydesdales, and horsing around with Bud Light ads. But this was an ad that, in its tonality, that was very intelligent. It was political, two things you probably would never do now. And among the many things Steve Jobs and Apple and his ad agency invented was the Super Bowl as the premium showcase for commercialism. And they continued with that and evolved with that as Apple went on throughout the years, and eventually the products, the design, the retail, and Steve Jobs himself, in terms of how he presented himself, were as sleek as the products themselves.
Now, Julio, when Jobs left the company the first time, right, it floundered a bit, came back. Do you foresee Apple maybe floundering now in the future a little bit without him?
I have a very personal stake in this. I'm very emotional about this company because I've idolized Apple. I've idolized Steve Jobs. And I'm not exaggerating when I say sometimes I'm awake at night kind of scared about this. But I hope not, because as I understand it, Steve Jobs spent a lot of time and a lot of effort putting a process in place, pulling together a staff of people that I think will do a good job. The question is, will Apple be as great as it's been, or is this as great as it ever will be, and will it decline slightly? I hope not, but it's history shows that does tend to happen.
The new iPhone kind of flopped a little bit, didn't it?
Well, I sort of think it was overshadowed by the rest of this news, but certainly people who are really excited about iPhones were disappointed it was an iPhone 5, right? Yeah. But I think you're always going to have a certain degree of that among this population who really loves their iPhones and Apple products.
Well, that's the tech writer. Were you disappointed?
No, because Apple does a big release, then sort of a medium release, and another big one, then another medium. That's the pattern. I sort of expected that.
No, I can tell you as a user, somebody who's carrying around a 3G, an old 3G, I was disappointed, and then somebody tweeted this, and I think just put it all into perspective. So you're telling me it's 7 times faster and it has artificial intelligence, and you're disappointed in this. And it was kind of like, yeah, okay.
The one medium that Apple has not conquered is TV.
Partly because, we're looking at an iPad right here as an example, and all of us have gotten used to screens of consistently smaller sizes. And yet when we go into our living rooms, the screens are bigger and bigger. TV remains a social media, a lean back type of media, as we say. People lay on the couch and all that. And people still, through generations, have appointments with shows, even though they can shift those appointments now with DVRs. But they not only haven't conquered it, Google has tried to do it, Microsoft, all the big tech companies are trying to, in effect, figure out where TV is going. More than anything, content is and will always be king, and they're not creating content for television.
And he's maybe saved the newspaper industry with the iPad?
Well, that's overblown,
Okay.
I think.
Right.
It's definitely a revenue source, and it's probably a credible revenue source. God knows the Star Tribune, for example, is trying. But it's interesting because that is an area where he really hasn't conquered it. People might not remember, but he tried to sort of impose music industry terms on the newspaper industry, insisted that he get the customer data, and he get a mandatory 30% of the cut. And the publishers basically went, and they won. Now they can sell their own apps on their site. If you've logged into anything that's on an iPad that's Star Tribune, and you don't have the Star Tribune app, you will be nagged to death. Well, that's because they're taking you off the app store, and if they sell that to you on their own site under their own terms, they keep a lot more of the money and they keep the customer data. I was, just speaking for myself, I read a lot more on screen than I do in print, and I love print. So I've got to believe that's the way the world is going, but it's interesting that Apple was not quite as dominant in that area.
And you guys got to agree with that, don't you think? I mean, I'm sure both of you read much of your stuff off a screen.
Well, I'll give you a related example. Public broadcasting, particularly public radio. Apple, a lot of people don't realize this, but Apple had a lot of impact on NPR because it popularized podcasts, which allowed NPR to distribute their programs in a downloadable form.
Exactly.
I never listened to public radio live, never. If a public
Thanks, Julio. We really appreciate that.
If a public radio show is not available in downloadable form, it's dead to me. That's the only way I listen to public radio.
I remember that.
We do
Thanks.
have the iPad here. Pass it down to the professor. Shayla, let's start with you.
Okay.
Yes.
And you've got a YouTube, a political site. Is that what you have?
Did it actually come?
It kind of came up, it looks like.
It kind of came up, but that wasn't really it.
Okay.
Technology.
Yeah,
Hopefully
right?
Anything bad?
Here.
Hit play.
That wasn't really what I was looking for. So it's actually, here, let's do this. YouTube,
Steve Jobs is
politics,
laughing somewhere.
sorry.
There you go.
Okay.
Yeah, they've created a whole new channel basically on YouTube. Yeah, okay,
Just for
here, let's
politics?
just do
How
this.
comprehensive
Just for
is it?
politics.
How comprehensive is it?
Well, fairly comprehensive. You can upload anything. So this is, of course, taking to a story about it. Oh, for goodness sake. And it's on Fox News.
We've seen it. It's
This is
really
terrible.
cool.
Okay, it's really cool.
Yeah.
But I can't even tell you the 2 points I was going to make about it. One is that they've set it up in such a way that the videos serve for the current candidates at the top. And in order to see the actual comments that people make on it, you have to hit a link that takes you off to YouTube. So that's kind of odd. The other point I wanted to make was I think they really designed it to look a lot like a news site. So for me, I sort of think, wow, this looks a lot like WashingtonPost.com. This looks a lot like, Politico. And I think it sort of raises the question to me, are they really trying to compete head to head with them by saying video is maybe the content people want the most?
Yeah.
So.
Pass it down to Julio.
Julio, now let's see if we can find
Writer's
this one.
block?
Yeah, a friend of mine, Mike Evangelist, used to be a very high-level person at Apple, and he has a lot of stories about his interactions with Steve Jobs, and he put all of these stories on his blog. There's a picture of him with Steve Jobs. Can we see that?
Yep.
Yeah, it's
Okay. And he, this is the strongest Minnesota connection I have found to Steve Jobs, the man, Steve Jobs, the legend. And so I recommend that people spend some time on the site because there's some absolutely riveting stories about the debut of the iPod. There's a story about the headphone jack not being clicky enough when it was inserted, and Steve Jobs was like furious, and he said, "We're not releasing this thing. Go fix this right now." That story's in here. I've written articles about this blog. I blogged about it recently, but don't read my stuff. Go directly to the source. Read these stories.
Writer's Block Live.
WritersBlockLive.com.
You got
Pass
it.
it down to David.
Now, David,
All right.
what do you think of the Wall Street protests?
Well, I may be like a lot of people in that I think it's an idea whose time has come. I'm just not 100% sure of the idea that's being expressed. So I sit there watching it and think to myself, okay, how did any of us react to the Tea Party protests when they came out? And are we being consistent where we should be in how we cover and are judging the Occupy Wall Street thing? Now, partisans will take issues with various things, like the Tea Party was corporate inspired and Occupy Wall Street isn't. But I agree with all the analysts that say we're overdue for some sort of populist rage. And where is it? And I can't figure out if
Where's the link?
if we're all too
There
enamored
it
of our
is.
toys. So this is just something for the media critic in me. That's what I do. This was a great moment where Fox News sent one of their hit guys out to the Occupy Wall Street thing to kind of, minimize it, make fun of it, say that it's completely anti-capitalist and completely, socialist anarchist. And they interviewed a guy who was actually super articulate, maybe one of the more articulate guys, explaining what they were trying to do. And part of his criticism was of Fox News.
Okay.
Fox News didn't run the interview, but of course now it's on YouTube, and it's wonderful.
New York Observer.
It's on the New York Observer site. It's the people formerly known as the audience.
Got it.
John.
John Rash.
Program preceding yours is the best nationally distributed news program in the country, the News Hour, formerly with Jim Lair. Part of the reason is because of the partnerships that they do. One really innovative one they're doing right now is called Patchwork Nation. And they take demographic data and tell the news narrative through that. So, as an example, a lot of talk today about the unemployment rate and about all the economic challenges the country is facing. They have put together not only a report that ran on the PBS NewsHour, but specific maps about how it plays in different regions around the country. It's a great source to really get your arms around what's happening in the news beyond the headlines.
You soldiered on great with a rough voice tonight. Thanks very much for coming down.
You're welcome.
Thanks, panel.
Good job, everybody.
Jesse Ventura returned